He leaned in close enough that I could smell the cheap energy drink on his breath, and right there in the middle of my son's school auditorium, with parents turning their heads and my kid frozen on stage under the bright lights, my ex-husband hissed, "You're intimidated by successful men because you're broke. That's why you don't want me around my son." The words hit like a slap, not because they were true, but because he said them like he'd been practicing in the mirror, like he'd decided this was the sentence that would finally flip reality on its head and make everyone forget who he really was. I remember the exact moment the room changed, like the air got tight and heavy, because his voice wasn't quiet enough and a couple people near us heard it, and once a lie is launched in public it becomes sticky, like gum on a shoe. My son, Noah, was 9 then, standing in a row with his classmates for a little music program, and he glanced toward the audience, and his eyes searched for me the way kids do when they need an anchor. I tried to smile at him, but my face felt wrong, like my muscles wouldn't cooperate, because I could see Kyle, my ex, watching Noah too, not with love, but with ownership. Kyle had shown up late, of course, no ticket, no courtesy, pushing past other parents as if he had a right to cut the line of everyone's ordinary decency. He wasn't there to see Noah sing. He was there because he'd heard, through the loose grapevine of small-town life, that I was coming with someone. He was there to make sure I didn't get to have one peaceful hour where I was just a mom and not a target. Mark, the man I was dating, had been sitting beside me, hands folded, polite and calm, trying to make himself small because he already knew what Kyle was like. Kyle saw Mark's suit jacket and clean haircut and the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to announce himself, and it lit Kyle up in the worst way. Kyle didn't insult Mark directly, not at first, because Mark looked like the kind of person who didn't swing back, which made Kyle braver. He went after me instead, because he knew my weak spot was Noah, and he knew that if he could make me look unstable, make me look petty or bitter, he could control the story. When he spat that line about me being broke, I almost laughed because it was so backwards it was unreal. I wasn't broke. I worked, I paid bills, I showed up. Kyle was the one who borrowed money from his own mother at 35 and called it a temporary thing. He was the one who quit jobs when supervisors didn't respect him, the one who talked big about businesses he never started, the one who called child support extortion, while Noah wore shoes I bought on sale and backpacks I replaced when the zippers broke. But that's what Kyle did. He flipped everything. In his world, the person who steadied the ship was the enemy, because a steady ship proves the storm isn't fate, it's a choice. He wanted the audience to see a struggling man being kept from his child by a jealous ex-wife. He wanted Noah to see it too, because if Noah ever fully understood who kept his life stable, Kyle knew he'd lose his grip. I stood up slowly, because my body was telling me to explode, but my mind was screaming that Noah was watching. Kyle's eyes were wide and shining, like he was enjoying the moment, and I knew then, with this cold clarity, that he wasn't just angry. He was performing. He wanted me to react. He wanted me loud, tears, shaking, anything that could be turned into proof that I was crazy. Mark touched my elbow gently, like a reminder that I wasn't alone, and Kyle noticed that touch and smirked, as if he'd already won. The principal's assistant walked by and gave us that tight smile people give when they sense trouble but hope it will pass. Noah's class started singing, their thin voices wavering, and I forced myself to sit back down because the show must go on, because my son deserved one normal memory. Kyle didn't sit. He stayed standing at the end of the aisle, arms crossed, glowering like a guard, and every few seconds he looked at Mark like he was measuring him. I stared forward, pretending to watch the kids, and inside my chest a hard, old fear woke up, because I knew this was only the beginning of what Kyle would do once he realized I might actually build a life that didn't revolve around him. It would be easier to explain if Kyle had always been like that, a cartoon villain from day one, but the truth is scarier because it's ordinary. Kyle could be charming when it benefited him, and for years I mistook that charm for love. We met in our early 20s in Columbus, Ohio, when both of us were broke in the normal way young adults are broke, splitting cheap rent and eating boxed pasta. Back then, Kyle's confidence looked like ambition. He had big talk, big plans, and he made me feel like the future was a door we could kick open together. My family liked him at first because he could talk to anyone. He'd hold doors, say, "Ma'am," laugh at the right times. But even then, little cracks showed if you watched long enough. If someone corrected him, even gently, he'd sulk. If I got a compliment at work, he'd make a joke that turned it into nothing. If I talked about going back to school, he'd say, "Why? We're going to have our own thing soon." That own thing kept moving like a mirage. When I got pregnant with Noah, Kyle acted thrilled in public. He rubbed my belly in front of friends and talked about being a family man. In private, he complained about money and freedom and how nobody understood the pressure he was under. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, 8 months pregnant, listening to him rant because his boss didn't recognize his value, and feeling this sinking thought: if he can't handle pressure now, what happens when the baby comes? The baby came, and for a while Kyle tried. He took pictures, posted them online, told people he'd never loved anything more. But when love turned into routine, diapers at 3 a.m., Dr. Bill's work schedules, Kyle started checking out. He'd disappear into video games, into hanging with the guys, into long drives that he said cleared his head. If I asked for help, he'd act like I was insulting him. He'd say, "I work all day," even when he'd been fired again and was between jobs. That was the pattern. Kyle's ego needed a constant supply of respect he didn't earn, and if reality didn't provide it, he demanded it from the people closest to him. When we separated, it wasn't because of one big betrayal. It was death by 1,000 small ones. Broken promises. Bills I paid alone. Nights I cried quietly in the bathroom so Noah wouldn't hear. Kyle would apologize just enough to reset the clock. Then he'd do it again. After the divorce, the control didn't stop. It changed shape. He couldn't control me in the house anymore, so he used Noah. He'd show up late for pickups and then tell Noah, "Your mom wouldn't let me come sooner." He'd miss school meetings and then claim I hid the schedule. He'd buy Noah a flashy toy once in a while, something loud and expensive looking, and then tell everyone, "See? I do everything for my son," while I did the quiet things: lunch money, homework folders, winter coats. Kyle's mother, Diane, was part of it too, in a way that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. Diane was the kind of woman who called herself straightforward, which was her excuse to be cruel. She treated Kyle like a wounded genius who'd been wronged by the world, and she treated me like the woman who couldn't appreciate him. When Kyle lost jobs, Diane blamed bad managers. When Kyle forgot Noah's birthday party time, Diane blamed me for not communicating. Diane wasn't dumb. She just loved the story where her son was the hero, because the alternative was admitting she'd raised a man who ran from responsibility. After the divorce, she'd text me paragraphs about how I needed to be kinder to Kyle and remember he's Noah's father, as if being a father was a title you could claim without doing the work. And every time I tried to set a boundary, Kyle would call me controlling, and Diane would say I was keeping a child from his family. It wore me down, not in a dramatic way, but in the slow way water wears down stone. I started watching my words, anticipating fights, planning my week around Kyle's moods, because it was easier than chaos. That's what manipulation does. It makes you think peace is something you earn by shrinking. And then Mark entered my life, and Kyle saw me stop shrinking, and it made him furious in a way that felt almost panicked. Mark wasn't some fantasy prince. He was simply a stable man, and to Kyle, stability looked like an attack. I met Mark through work when our company partnered with his firm on a project. He was in his late 30s, divorced, no kids, and he had this calm way of listening that I wasn't used to. He didn't interrupt. He didn't twist my words. If he said he'd call at 7, he called at 7. The first time I noticed the difference, it wasn't even romantic. It was just relief. After a few months, we started dating quietly. I didn't post about it. I didn't introduce him to Noah right away. I was careful because I'd learned the hard way that anything Kyle could grab, he would. But Kyle had always had this radar for my happiness. It's like he could sense when my life was getting lighter, and he'd rush in to make it heavy again. He started showing up to exchanges unannounced, asking questions that weren't his business. "Where you been? Who's that on the phone? Why you dressed like that?" I'd answer politely and briefly, because any emotion fed him. Kyle began telling Noah little things like, "Your mom's acting weird," or "Your mom thinks she's too good now." Noah would repeat them sometimes in that innocent way kids repeat adult poison without understanding it, and my heart would crack every time because I'd see Kyle's fingerprints on my child's thoughts. I tried co-parenting counseling. Kyle went once, sat with his arms crossed, and told the counselor I was alienating him. When the counselor asked him for specific examples, Kyle got vague and angry and said the counselor was biased. Then he refused to go again. That's when I realized Kyle didn't want peace. He wanted leverage. Around that time, I found out Kyle was behind on child support again. Not by a little, by months. When I brought it up, he exploded, saying I was only about money. And then, in the same breath, he said, "If you're so broke, maybe you should get a real man to pay your bills." The contradiction didn't bother him. It never did. In Kyle's mind, words were weapons, not facts. The more he sensed Mark was different, the more Kyle leaned into this idea that I was intimidated by successful men. He started telling mutual friends that I hated seeing Kyle do well, which was laughable because Kyle wasn't doing well. He bounced between gig jobs and short-term warehouse work, always quitting or getting fired, always with a story about how someone disrespected him. But he'd post photos in front of rented cars, flashing sunglasses, pretending. His image mattered more than his life. Meanwhile, I was building something real, a steady routine for Noah, therapy sessions to help him process the divorce, savings slowly growing again. Kyle hated that because it meant his chaos wasn't the center anymore. Diane joined in, too, calling me and saying, "I hear you're dating someone with money," like it was a crime. She warned me, in this sugary voice, that men like that think they own you. And I almost laughed because Kyle was the only man who had ever treated me like property. When I finally told Kyle I was seeing someone, I did it calmly, with a focus on Noah. I said I wouldn't introduce Mark until things were serious, and until Noah felt comfortable. Kyle pretended to be fine, which should have been my first clue that something was coming. A week later, Noah came home from Kyle's place quiet and withdrawn. At bedtime, he asked me, "Mom, are you going to replace Dad?" I felt my throat close. I asked him why he was thinking that, and he said, "Dad said rich guys steal families." My hands shook as I tucked him in, because I knew what Kyle was doing. Kyle wasn't just jealous of Mark. He was planting fear in Noah, using my son's love as a battlefield. And once a parent uses a child that way, they don't stop easily because it gives them the one thing they crave: control with a human face. The first major betrayal after that school auditorium moment didn't look like a betrayal at first. It looked like paperwork. I got a certified letter 2 weeks later. Kyle had filed an emergency motion in family court claiming I was exposing Noah to unsafe people and that I was unstable and financially irresponsible. The motion requested temporary full custody pending investigation. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, and my vision blurred, not from tears but from this sudden hot rage that made everything feel too bright. Kyle wasn't just trying to hurt me emotionally, he was trying to take my child. He attached screenshots from social media, photos from my friend's birthday dinner, where Mark happened to be in the background. He wrote paragraphs about unknown men around Noah, even though Noah hadn't met Mark yet. He claimed Noah told him I left him alone, which was a lie so bold it made me dizzy. Kyle knew I planned my entire life around Noah. I barely went to the grocery store without him unless my sister watched him. But Kyle counted on something, that the court system, already overloaded, sometimes reacts to fear first and truth later. He also counted on something else, that people carry old stereotypes about divorced moms dating. That night, I slept with my phone on my pillow because I was terrified Kyle would show up with police. Mark offered to help me hire a lawyer, but I refused at first because I didn't want Kyle to be able to say, "See, she's using a man's money." Mark didn't argue. He just said, "Tell me what you need." The hearing was set quickly. Kyle arrived in court wearing a suit he didn't own, hair slicked back, looking like a man playing a role. Diane sat behind him, arms folded, eyes sharp, like she was watching a trial that she believed she should win. Kyle told the judge, with this practiced sadness, that he was worried about Noah and that I was bringing men around and trying to replace him. He even repeated that same line, almost word for word. She's intimidated by successful men, Your Honor. She doesn't want me around my son because she's broke and bitter. My lawyer, because I got one, fast and paid with money I'd saved for a new car, stood up and calmly dismantled it. We brought in Noah's attendance records, my work schedule, daycare receipts, therapy notes showing stability. We showed that Kyle's child support was behind. Kyle's face tightened when that came out, like he'd been slapped with a fact. The judge didn't grant him full custody, but the judge did order a temporary evaluation and asked both of us to follow a stricter parenting plan until it was resolved. That might sound reasonable, but in practice it meant Kyle got more time and more access while the system figured it out, and Kyle used that access like a crowbar. He started interrogating Noah after every day at my house. Who was there? Did Mom go out? Did she leave you alone? Noah, caught between loyalty and fear, started lying to keep the peace. He'd tell Kyle what Kyle wanted to hear, then come home and cling to me like he was afraid I'd disappear. My son's stomach started hurting before transitions. His teacher emailed me saying Noah seemed distracted. Kyle smiled through it all, because chaos was working for him. Then came the public humiliation. Kyle posted on Facebook, tagging my name, writing about fathers being kept from their kids, and women chasing rich men while kids suffer. People I hadn't spoken to in years commented with fake sympathy, and Diane's friends shared it like it was a moral lesson. I wanted to scream, but I stayed quiet online because my lawyer warned me that anything I said could be used in court. That silence made Kyle bolder. He started showing up at my workplace parking lot. Not inside, because he didn't want security called, but close enough to watch. Once, he approached my car while Noah was in the back seat and said loudly, "Tell your boyfriend he can't buy my kid." Noah heard it. Noah's face went pale. I told Kyle to step back, voice steady, and Kyle laughed like I was a joke. That was the moment I realized Kyle didn't care if Noah felt safe. Kyle cared if Kyle felt powerful. And when a person values power over a child's peace, they will break things you didn't even know were breakable. The financial damage came next, and it was the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it because it was so calculated. Kyle and I had closed most shared accounts after the divorce, but there was one old savings account we'd opened years earlier for Noah's future. It wasn't huge, but it mattered: birthday money, small deposits, my tax refund contributions, a little cushion for school trips and emergencies. The account required both signatures to withdraw large amounts, so I thought it was safe. One afternoon, I logged in and saw the balance nearly empty. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. I called the bank immediately, voice trembling, and the representative told me withdrawals had been made in person with identification over 2 separate visits.
Kyle.
He'd gone into a branch, smiled at a teller, and drained our son's money. Later, when I confronted him through text because I was trying to keep records, he responded with one line: "I needed it, and it was mine too." That was it. No apology. No shame. The next day, Diane called me and said, "Kyle is under stress. You should stop attacking him." She said it like I was the thief. Like I was the problem for noticing. My lawyer filed an emergency request to freeze the remaining funds and demanded restitution, but Kyle had already moved the money through cash withdrawals. He knew how to make it hard to trace. Then he escalated again. He made a report to Child Protective Services. The investigator who came to my door was kind but serious, and I stood there feeling exposed, like my private life had been dragged into daylight. The report claimed I left Noah home alone at night while I went out with men, that there was substance use, that Noah was afraid. It was all lies. The investigator walked through my home, looked at Noah's room, checked the pantry, asked Noah gentle questions. Noah looked confused and scared, and afterward he asked me, "Am I in trouble?" I held him so tight my arms ached. The case was closed quickly because there was nothing there, but the damage had been done. Noah now knew that adults could show up at our door because of something his father said. Kyle didn't just want to win in court. He wanted me to feel unsafe in my own life. Mark offered, again, to step in financially, to cover legal fees, to take pressure off. And I did accept, partly because by then Kyle's attacks were costing me hours of work, and I couldn't keep bleeding. Kyle found out because Kyle always found out, and he used it as proof. He told Noah, "Your mom needs a rich guy to survive." He told friends, "She's being bought." He told the court evaluator that Mark was controlling and dangerous, without ever meeting him. Meanwhile, Kyle had no issue benefiting from Diane's money. Diane paid Kyle's phone bill and car insurance, but Kyle called that help from family, like it was noble. When I paid for Noah's braces, Kyle called it showing off. The hypocrisy was so thick it felt like walking through smoke. Then came the worst humiliation. Kyle showed up at Noah's soccer game with a woman I'd never seen before and introduced her loudly as Noah's new mom. Noah's cheeks burned red. He looked at me across the field with panic in his eyes. Kyle did it on purpose, turning my child into a stage prop again. Parents whispered. One of them, a mom I'd been friendly with, texted later asking if I was okay. I said yes, because what else could I say? That night Noah cried, saying he didn't want new moms, that he just wanted everyone to stop fighting. I sat on the floor beside his bed and promised him I would make it stop. And in that promise, something in me hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. Kyle had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd stolen from our son. He'd called the government on me with lies. He'd made Noah feel like love was a weapon. That was the point where my fear started turning into a plan. By the time the evaluation interviews were happening, I had a folder so thick it could have been a novel, and every page was a quiet, factual record of Kyle's chaos. Missed exchanges, angry texts, financial statements, the closed CPS report, screenshots of his online posts, records of child support arrears, and notes from Noah's therapist about anxiety around transitions. The evaluator, a middle-aged woman with a calm voice, met with each of us separately and with Noah. She didn't react dramatically to anything, which I appreciated, because drama is what Kyle fed on. Kyle, on the other hand, tried to charm her. He talked about fathers' rights, about toxic women, about how I hated successful men and wanted to keep Noah from his father. He used the word broke like a label he could stamp on me to make me small. The evaluator asked him about employment stability. Kyle got defensive. She asked him about the savings account withdrawals. Kyle lied. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. That lie might have worked if I didn't have the bank's security footage request already in process and the teller statements being prepared. My lawyer had moved fast. I didn't tell Kyle because I'd learned that Kyle only respected consequences he couldn't talk his way out of. Meanwhile, Mark finally met Noah in a controlled, gentle way, at a public park, with Noah's therapist's approval and with clear boundaries. Mark didn't try to be a dad. He didn't overstep. He just played catch, asked Noah about his favorite video games, and listened. Noah warmed up slowly, cautious like a kid who's learned that adults can change overnight. Later, Noah said quietly, "Mark is nice." That sentence felt like sunlight after a long winter. Kyle, of course, hated it. He started texting me late at night, accusing me of grooming Noah to replace him. He threatened to expose Mark. He said he'd make sure Mark never saw Noah again. One night, he sent a message that chilled me. "If anything happens to my relationship with my son, it's on you." It wasn't an outright threat, but it was close enough that my skin crawled. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then Kyle made his biggest mistake. In his desperation, he reached out to Mark directly. Kyle didn't have Mark's number, but he found Mark's LinkedIn, then used a mutual contact to get an email address, and he sent Mark a long, unhinged email about me being broke, about me hating successful men, about me using Mark for money, and about how Mark should stay away from my son. Mark showed me the email without drama, but I could see anger in his eyes. Not a violent anger, an adult anger, the kind that says, "This ends now." Mark replied once, short and firm, telling Kyle to communicate through me and legal channels and not to contact him again. Kyle didn't stop. He showed up at Mark's office building one afternoon, trying to get past the receptionist, claiming it was urgent family business. Security escorted him out. Kyle then posted online that Mark had connections and was silencing him. Every move Kyle made dug his hole deeper. Still, the worst part was watching Noah carry the weight. Noah started asking me if he could choose where to live. He started saying things like, "If I'm good, Will Dad stop being mad? That broke me, because kids should never think they can manage adult emotions with obedience. Noah's therapist told me, gently, that Noah was showing signs of chronic stress. That word, chronic, rang in my head for days. I realized this wasn't just about court schedules or money. This was about my son's nervous system, his childhood, his sense of safety. I couldn't let Kyle keep rewriting reality until Noah grew up thinking love always comes with fear. I began recording exchanges in public places, not secretly inside homes, just documenting what was said when Kyle tried to start fights. I kept every voicemail. And then, the week before the final custody hearing, the bank finally confirmed what I already knew. Kyle had withdrawn the money in person, twice, using his ID, and the teller remembered him because he joked about taking what's mine. My lawyer smiled grimly when she read that. She said, "This changes everything." And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly, but the sense that reality was about to win. The emotional climax happened in a courthouse hallway, not in a dramatic screaming match, but in a moment so raw and humiliating for Kyle that it stripped his mask off in front of everyone who mattered. The final hearing was packed. Kyle, Diane, Kyle's new girlfriend, my sister, Mark sitting quietly behind me, the evaluator, attorneys, and the judge who looked tired in the way judges look when they've seen too many families break. Kyle started confident, repeating his favorite lines, talking about how I was broke and intimidated and keeping him from a son. He painted himself as the victim of a woman who hates successful men, and he said it with such conviction that for a second I understood how people get fooled by performances like his. Then my lawyer stood up and began, calmly, with facts. She presented the closed CPS report. She presented child support records. She presented the online posts. And then she presented the bank documentation and the teller's statement.
Kyle's face changed.
It wasn't guilt. It was panic. The judge asked Kyle directly if he had withdrawn funds from the shared savings account intended for Noah. Kyle tried to deny it, but the judge had the teller statement, the transaction details, and the signed withdrawal slips. Kyle's lawyer whispered urgently to him, and Kyle's jaw worked like he was chewing through pride. Finally, Kyle snapped and said, loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "I took it because I needed it." She acts like she's the only one who matters. There it was. Not a mistake. Not confusion. A decision. He admitted stealing from his child to punish me for having a life. Diane made a small sound behind him, like a gasp, and I looked back and saw something I'd never seen on her face before, uncertainty. For years she'd protected Kyle from consequences by feeding him excuses. In that moment, even she couldn't pretend it was noble. The judge's expression hardened. The evaluator testified that Noah was experiencing anxiety linked to co-parent conflict and that Kyle had engaged in behavior consistent with manipulation and boundary violations. Kyle's lawyer tried to object, tried to spin, but the evidence was stacked like bricks. Then came the confrontation that wasn't planned. During a brief recess in the hallway, Kyle approached me fast, eyes blazing, and hissed, "You did this. You think you're better because you got some suit sitting with you." I stepped back instinctively, and Mark stood up, not aggressively, just present. Kyle looked at Mark and repeated his earlier insult, louder, because he wanted an audience. "She's intimidated by successful men because she's broke. That's why she doesn't want me around my son." People turned. A bailiff watched. I felt my heart pounding, but I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said clearly, "Kyle, you stole Noah's money. You lied to CPS. You made our son afraid. This is why boundaries exist." Kyle's eyes flicked around, searching for support, and for the first time, he didn't find it. His girlfriend looked uncomfortable. Diane stared at the floor. The bailiff told Kyle to step back. Kyle laughed, but the laugh was thin and ugly, like a tire losing air. Back inside, the judge made the ruling. I was granted primary physical custody. Kyle's parenting time was reduced and structured. Exchanges were to be supervised temporarily, and Kyle was ordered to repay the stolen funds. The judge also issued a no-contact order regarding Mark and instructed Kyle to communicate only through a co-parenting app monitored for inappropriate language. Kyle's face flushed red. He started to protest, but the judge shut him down. The judge's voice was steady, almost bored, which made it more powerful. "Mr. Carter, this court is focused on the child's best interest. Your behavior has not reflected that interest." Kyle sat down like someone had unplugged him. I should have felt victorious, but what I felt was grief. Grief for Noah, for the years of peace Kyle stole, for the part of me that once believed Kyle could be better. As we left, Kyle muttered, "You'll regret this." But his voice had lost its magic. It sounded like a man talking to himself in an empty room. Outside, Noah was with my sister, waiting. When I told him gently that the judge made a plan to keep him safe and calm, Noah didn't cheer. He just exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for months. And then he said, in a small voice that ruined me, "So, I don't have to be scared all the time?" I knelt down and hugged him, and I promised, again, that I would protect his peace. This time, it wasn't just a promise. It was a court order. It was proof. It was reality finally putting a fence around the chaos. The consequences weren't instant happiness because real life doesn't work like that, but they were solid, and that solidity felt like oxygen. Kyle fought the repayment order at first, claiming he couldn't afford it, but the court didn't care about his excuses anymore. Wage garnishment was set up through the state, and slowly, month by month, the money returned to Noah's account. I opened a new savings account in my name only, with Noah as beneficiary, and I documented every deposit. I also moved exchanges to a supervised center for a while. That alone lowered Noah's anxiety because there were rules, cameras, staff. Kyle couldn't corner me in parking lots or hiss insults through clenched teeth. The co-parenting app helped too. Kyle hated it because he couldn't rewrite conversations later. Every message was time-stamped. Every threat became evidence. Kyle tested the boundaries at first, sending passive-aggressive lines like, "Hope your rich boyfriend is happy." But the staff reviewing the app flagged it, and Kyle got warned. After a couple warnings, he got quiet, not because he'd changed morally, but because consequences finally cost him something he valued: access. Diane tried a different tactic. She reached out to me with a message that sounded softer than before, saying she just wants what's best for Noah. I responded politely but firmly. Any communication about Noah would go through the same channels and would respect the court plan. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I learned that some people use explanations as doors. I stopped giving doors. Noah continued therapy, and I made small changes at home to rebuild safety. Consistent routines, calm mornings, fewer rushed transitions. I also met with a financial advisor, not because I was suddenly wealthy, but because I wanted to be intentional. Kyle had used money as a weapon, and I wanted to turn money into a tool for stability. Mark supported me without trying to take over, which mattered. He didn't talk about saving us.
He talked about partnership.
Eventually, Noah asked if Mark could come to a soccer game again. I said yes, and we sat on a blanket in the grass with snacks, and nobody screamed, and nobody performed. Kyle was there too, at a distance, because he still had time with Noah, but he was different around witnesses now. He watched us with that same bitterness, but he didn't approach. For Noah, that quiet distance was everything. It told him the adults had lines now, and lines held. A few months later, Kyle violated the no-contact order by sending Mark a message through a mutual friend. It wasn't overtly threatening, but it was harassment, and my lawyer filed it immediately. The judge extended the no-contact order and added a requirement that Kyle attend a co-parenting class and anger management sessions if he wanted his parenting time expanded in the future. Kyle ranted online again, calling the court rigged, but fewer people listened this time. Performances get old when facts repeat. I also made a decision that felt huge. I changed Noah's school the following year, not to run away, but to give him a fresh start away from Kyle's network of gossip. We moved across town to a quieter neighborhood, still in the same county to comply with custody rules, but far enough that random run-ins became rare. On moving day, Noah stood in his new room and smiled in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. That smile was my reward. It didn't erase the past, but it proved the future could be different. The biggest consequence, though, was internal. For years, Kyle had trained me to doubt myself. Every accusation made me reflexively search for my own flaw. After the ruling, After the evidence, after watching a judge call Kyle's behavior what it was, something in my mind untangled. I stopped asking, what if I'm being unfair, and started asking, what keeps Noah safe? That question became my compass. And when you have a compass, manipulative people lose the ability to spin you in circles. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharp edges without erasing the truth. A year after the hearing, Kyle was still Kyle, just contained. He attended the required classes, not with humility, but with the determination of someone checking boxes. His parenting time stayed structured, because while he could behave for short periods, the deeper patterns didn't disappear. Noah learned, slowly, that he wasn't responsible for managing his father's feelings. Therapy helped him name what was happening, that adults sometimes say things to control you, that love shouldn't feel like fear, that it's okay to enjoy time with one parent without betraying the other. I watched my son's shoulders relax over months, like his body finally believed the emergency was over. Mark became a steady presence, never forcing closeness, letting Noah set the pace. They built their own relationship through small moments, Lego sets, homework help, trips to the science museum. The first time Noah introduced Mark to a friend as my mom's boyfriend, without hesitation, I had to turn my head away because tears rose so fast. Not sad tears. Relief tears. Kyle still tried, occasionally, to jab at me. At one exchange, he muttered, "Must be nice having someone else pay your way." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood that Kyle's insults were mirrors. When he called me broke, he was talking about his own fear of never catching up. When he accused me of being intimidated by successful men, he was confessing his intimidation. Kyle needed me to be small so he could feel big. Once I refused to be small, his script stopped working. Diane changed too, in a quiet, complicated way. She never apologized, not directly, but she stopped calling me. She stopped sending long lectures. I think she realized, on some level, that defending Kyle had cost Noah peace, and even if she couldn't admit that out loud, her silence was a kind of surrender. I didn't need her apology as much as I needed her to stop fueling the fire. At home, life became normal in the sweetest, most boring way. School mornings with cereal and backpacks. Friday movie nights. Noah complaining about chores. Me reminding him to brush his teeth. The drama that once felt constant became something we talked about in past tense. Sometimes Noah would ask questions, trying to make sense of it, like, "Why did Dad say you didn't want him around me?" And I'd answer carefully, truthfully, without poisoning Noah against his father, because I refused to become what Kyle claimed I was. I'd say, "Your dad was scared of losing you, and he made bad choices. But you are loved, and the adults are responsible for their own feelings." Noah would nod, absorbing it like a kid learning the rules of gravity. On the anniversary of the court ruling, I took Noah out for ice cream after therapy. We sat on a bench outside the shop, and Noah licked chocolate off a spoon and said, casually, "I like when it's quiet now." That sentence was my closure. Not revenge. Not a dramatic apology. Quiet.
Peace.
Justice looked like a child who could eat ice cream without worrying who would explode next. Later that night, after Noah was asleep, I sat on the couch and let myself feel everything I'd had to hold back. The anger, the fear, the exhaustion, the grief. I didn't push it away. I let it move through me like a storm passing. And when it settled, I realized something simple. Kyle's biggest weapon had been my instinct to keep the peace at any cost. Once I learned that peace without boundaries is just another form of surrender, everything changed. The title of his favorite accusation, me being broke, intimidated, keeping him away, ended up being the proof of his insecurity, not my failure. I didn't win because Mark was successful or because the court saved me. I won because I stopped letting someone else define reality. I became the adult Noah needed, even when it was hard, even when it was lonely, even when it meant being the villain in Kyle's story. And now, in the quiet, in the steady routines, in Noah's calmer eyes, I can finally say the story is complete. Not because Kyle learned a lesson, but because Noah got his childhood back, and I got my life back, and the chaos no longer lives in our house.